The dust swirled lazy and mean across the yard, coating everything in that fine yellow grit that settled in the creases of a body's skin and never quite washed clean. The afternoon sun hung low and merciless over the weathered homestead, its boards gone silver gray from too many seasons of wind and want. Inside the cramped front room, Flora Hutchins lay dying on a corn-shuck mattress that rustled with each labored breath. Little Verity sat beside her mother, her small fingers wrapped tight around Flora's work-worn hand. The child's face, usually bright as a spring morning, had gone solemn as a church bell. She'd seen enough in her 7 years to know when death came calling, had watched it take the Henderson baby last winter and old Mrs. Garrett the summer before. But this was different. This was her mama. "I know it's my mama's last day alive," Verity whispered, her voice catching like cloth on a nail. The words fell into the stifling air of the room, heavy as stones in still water. Flora's eyes, once the color of prairie sky, flickered open at her daughter's voice. Her lips, cracked and pale, formed words without sound. The bruises along her jaw had faded from purple to yellow-green, but the damage went deeper than what showed on skin. 3 weeks since Thomas Hutchins had put his fist through her ribs for the last time. 3 weeks since his kin had dragged him away, leaving Flora broken on the kitchen floor while they cursed her for making him do it. The door to the back room creaked open, and Martha Hutchins stepped through, her face set hard as flint. Thomas's sister had the same cruel mouth as her brother, the same way of looking at Flora like she was something scraped off a boot heel. "Still breathing, I see," Martha said, not bothering to lower her voice. She carried a bucket of water, but made no move to bring it closer. "Lord knows why you're dragging this out. Would be kinder to all if you'd just let go." Verity's chin trembled, but she kept her eyes on her mother's face. She'd learned not to look at Aunt Martha directly, learned that drawing attention only brought sharp words or sharper hands. From outside came the sound of men's voices, low and rumbling like distant thunder. Thomas's brothers, Samuel and Josiah, sat on the porch passing a jug between them. Their laughter carried through the thin walls, coarse and careless. They were waiting. Verity knew. Waiting for her mama to die so they could decide what to do with her. "That girl needs to learn she's got Hutchins' blood," Samuel had said that morning, loud enough for all to hear. "Can't have her growing up soft like her mother." The neighbors knew. Of course they knew. In a town like Perdition Creek, secrets had a way of walking themselves down Main Street in broad daylight. But knowing and doing were two different creatures entirely. The women who used to bring Flora mending work now crossed to the other side of the street. The men who'd tipped their hats to her at Sunday meeting now looked through her like she was made of glass. Only old Constance Muller had dared to visit, bringing a pot of thin soup 2 days back. She'd clucked her tongue at Flora's condition, whispered a prayer, and left quickly when she heard the men returning. "Some battles can't be won by decent folk," she'd murmured at the door, not meeting Verity's eyes. The afternoon wore on like a slow bleed. Flies buzzed against the single window, trying to escape the heat. Flora's breathing grew more ragged, each inhale a mountain to climb. Verity held tight to her mother's hand, feeling the pulse flutter like a bird's wing against her palm. "Mama," the child whispered, leaning close. "Mama, please don't go, please." Flora's fingers tightened briefly around her daughter's hand. With tremendous effort, she turned her head toward Verity. Her voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "Be strong, my girl, stronger than—" The words faded before they could finish, but Verity understood. Stronger than me, stronger than this, stronger than the Hutchins men who treated women like possessions to be broken and discarded. Martha appeared in the doorway again, this time with Josiah behind her. He was a mountain of a man, his hands like ham hocks, his smile mean as a rattlesnake. "How much longer?" he asked his sister, jerking his chin toward Flora. "Not long now," Martha replied, studying Flora with the dispassion of someone watching a clock run down. "We should talk about the girl. After," Josiah said. "Samuel's got ideas about that. Says his wife could use the help around the house. Make sure she learns proper respect for her betters. Verity's stomach clenched. She knew Samuel's wife, had seen the bruises that matched her mama's. The thought of living in that house, of becoming another silent woman with downcast eyes, made her press closer to her mother's side. The sun slanted lower, painting long shadows across the dusty floor. The heat seemed to press in from all sides, thick as wool. Flora's breathing had gone shallow, barely stirring the thin fabric of her dress. Her skin had taken on a waxy sheen, like candle tallow. "I'm here, Mama," Verity whispered, tears tracking clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "I won't leave you. I won't let them take me away." But even as she said it, she knew the emptiness of the promise. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with no kin but the Hutchins family, who saw her as nothing more than an extra mouth to feed and a pair of hands to work. When her mama died, she would belong to them entirely. The room had gone quiet, except for Flora's struggling breath and the creak of the house settling in the heat. Even the flies had stilled. Verity felt the change in the air. The way the light seemed to dim though the sun still shone. She'd felt this before. In other rooms, at other bedsides. Death had its own presence, patient and inexorable. "No," she whispered fiercely, gripping her mother's hand tighter. "No, not yet. Please, not yet." But Flora's eyes had gone distant, looking at something beyond the water-stained ceiling, beyond the confines of the small, stifling room. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, Verity thought she might speak again. Instead, a long, soft sigh escaped, and then nothing. The silence that followed was complete, heavy as a gravestone. Verity stared at her mother's still face, waiting for the next breath that wouldn't come. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. The men on the porch continued their drinking. The world went on spinning, indifferent to the breaking of one small girl's heart. "Martha!" Josiah's voice boomed from the doorway. "Is it done?" Martha stepped forward, placed 2 fingers against Flora's neck, and nodded. Finally. Lord knows she took her time about it. Verity didn't move, couldn't move. She sat holding her mother's cooling hand, her tears falling silently. She wanted to scream, to rage, to beat her small fists against the unfairness of it all. But she'd learned early that showing pain only invited more of it. "Come on, girl," Martha said, reaching for Verity's shoulder. "No use sitting with the dead. We've got arrangements to make." It was then, in that moment between grief and whatever came next, that they heard it. The slow, steady beat of hoofbeats approaching. Not the rushed gallop of someone with urgent business, but the measured pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had all the time in the world to get there. The men on the porch fell silent, even through her tears. Verity could sense the change in the air, the sudden tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. She lifted her head, still clutching her mother's hand, and listened as the hoofbeats drew closer. Closer, until they stopped just outside the gate. In the doorway, Martha and Josiah exchanged glances. Visitors were rare at the Hutchins place, especially now, especially uninvited. The silence stretched taut as a fiddle string, and Verity found herself holding her breath, waiting for something she couldn't name. Then came the sound of boots on the porch steps, slow and deliberate, and a shadow fell across the threshold, blocking out what remained of the dying light. The man who filled the doorway stood tall as a church steeple, his broad shoulders blocking out the last of the daylight. Dust motes danced around his silhouette like moths around a flame. He wore the clothes of a working man, worn leather chaps over faded denims, a shirt that had seen better days, and boots that spoke of long miles traveled. His hat, a weathered Stetson the color of dried tobacco, cast his face in shadow. Samuel and Josiah had risen from their chairs on the porch, the jug of whiskey forgotten between them. Through the thin walls, Verity could hear the scrape of boot heels on wood, the creak of gun leather as hands moved toward holsters. "This is private property," Samuel called out, his voice carrying that particular brand of meanness that weak men mistake for strength. Family business going on here. Best you move along. Stranger. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed his hat with deliberate slowness, revealing a face carved by wind and weather. His hair, dark as coffee grounds, hung just past his collar, but it was his eyes that made Martha take an involuntary step backward. Gray as winter sky, steady as bedrock, taking in everything and giving nothing away. Heard there was a death, the stranger said finally. His voice was low, rough as sandpaper, like he didn't use it much. Came to pay respects. Josiah pushed past his sister into the main room, his bulk making the floorboards groan. Don't recall asking for your respects. The woman's dead. Nothing here concerns you. The stranger's gaze moved past Josiah like he was nothing more than smoke, landing on the scene within. Flora's still form on the mattress, and beside her, Verity, small and trembling, still clutching her mother's hand. Something shifted in those gray eyes, a flicker of emotion quickly masked. Everything concerns me that ought to, he said simply, and stepped inside. The room seemed to shrink with him in it. He moved with the controlled grace of a man comfortable with violence, but not eager for it. Josiah's hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip, but something in the stranger's bearing made him hesitate. I said, Josiah began, but the stranger was already past him, moving toward the mattress with purposeful strides. He knelt beside Flora's body, his movements gentle despite his size. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, at the faded bruises on her face, at the worn hands that spoke of hard work and harder times. Then his gaze shifted to Verity. The child met his eyes, and for the first time since her mother's breathing stopped, she felt something other than despair. There was no pity in the stranger's look, no false sympathy, just a steady acknowledgement of her grief and something else. A promise, perhaps, or a question. What's your name, little one? His voice had gentled, though it still carried that sandpaper roughness. Verity, she whispered. Verity May Hutchins. That's a good name, he said. A strong name. Your mama picked that? Verity nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She said it meant truth, said truth was the most important thing a person could carry. The stranger nodded slowly, as if filing this information away. Your mama was a wise woman. Now see here, Martha interjected, finding her voice at last. I don't know who you think you are, but this is a family matter. The girl's our responsibility now. The stranger rose to his feet in one fluid motion, and suddenly the room felt very small indeed. He turned to face Martha, and she took another step back. Your responsibility, he repeated, his voice flat as prairie land. Like Flora was your responsibility? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Martha's face flushed red, then white. How dare you? She spluttered. You don't know anything about— I know enough. The stranger cut her off. Know the look of a woman who died hard. Know the look of kin who stood by and watched it happen. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his face dark with anger. Behind him, other shapes moved, neighbors drawn by the commotion, hovering at the edge of the yard like vultures. Mister, you got about 10 seconds to get off this property before— The stranger's hand moved to his hip, not to the worn Colt holstered there, but to rest casually near it. The gesture was subtle, almost lazy, but it stopped Samuel's words like a dam stops water. Before what? The stranger asked mildly. The silence stretched taut. Verity watched it all with wide eyes, her hand still clasping her mother's, though the warmth had long since fled. She'd seen men posture before, seen the dance of threat and counter-threat that passed for conversation among the Hutchins men, but this was different. The stranger wasn't posturing, he was simply ready. The woman's dead, Samuel said finally, his voice less certain now. The girl's our blood, that's the law of it. The law, the stranger repeated, and something like amusement flickered across his weathered features. Tell me, where was the law when Flora needed it? He turned back to Verity, going to one knee again so they were eye to eye. Little one, do you want to stay here? The question was asked quietly, meant for her ears alone, but in the charged silence of the room, everyone heard it. Verity's throat worked, but no words came. How could she explain the terror that gripped her at the thought of remaining in this house, under the care of people who'd watched her mother waste away and done nothing? "She doesn't get a choice," Martha snapped. "She's 7 years old and our kin. The matter's settled." The stranger didn't take his eyes off Verity. "There's always a choice," he said softly. "Question is whether folks are brave enough to make it." Verity looked into those gray eyes and saw something she'd never seen in the eyes of the Hutchins clan. Respect. He was talking to her like she was a person, not a burden or a possession. Her small fingers tightened on her mother's hand one last time, then slowly released. "I don't want to stay," she whispered, the words barely audible. Then, louder, "I don't want to stay here." The stranger nodded once, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. He stood, scooping Verity up in one smooth motion. She should have been frightened. He was a stranger, after all, and she'd been taught to fear strange men. But his arms were steady and careful, and he held her like she was something precious rather than something broken. "You can't just take her," Samuel roared, pushing fully into the room now. "I'll have the sheriff on you." The stranger settled Verity on his hip, her small weight nothing to him. "Sheriff Daniels? You mean the one who's been turning a blind eye to what goes on in this house for years? By all means, fetch him. I'd be pleased to have a word." The threat behind the pleasantness was unmistakable. Several of the neighbors who'd been watching from the yard began to drift away, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. In a town like Perdition Creek, people had a keen sense for when trouble was about to boil over. "What about the woman?" Josiah asked, gesturing toward Flora's body. "She needs burying." The stranger looked at Flora one last time, something softening in his hard features. "She does, but not by you. Not after what you let happen to her." He reached into his pocket with his free hand, pulling out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to the floor at Martha's feet, where it landed with a distinct clink of coin. "For the undertaker," he said. "See she gets a proper burial. Pine box, not a pauper's shroud. If I hear different, I'll be back." The promise in those words made even Josiah step aside as the stranger moved toward the door. Verity buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the sense of leather and trail dust and something else. Safety, perhaps, or hope. "You don't even know her," Martha called after them, desperation creeping into her voice. "She's nothing to you." The stranger paused in the doorway, his silhouette once again dark against the dying light. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of mountains. "She's a child who just lost her mother," he said simply. "That makes her everything." Then he was through the door and down the steps, his boots raising small puffs of dust in the yard. Verity lifted her head from his shoulder to see the Hutchins clan clustered in the doorway, their face twisted with rage and something else, fear, perhaps, of this man who'd walked into their domain and taken what they'd considered theirs. The stranger's horse waited at the gate, a bay gelding that whickered softly at their approach, with the same easy grace. He swung up into the saddle, settling Verity in front of him. She'd never been on a horse before, and for a moment vertigo gripped her. Then his arm came around her, steady as an oak beam, and the fear subsided. "My mama," Verity whispered, turning to look back at the house. "We can't just leave her." "We're not leaving her," the stranger said quietly. "We're taking her with us, the part that matters. Anyway, the part that lives in you." As they rode away, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Behind them, Verity could hear Samuel shouting, making threats about the law and ownership and rights. But the words grew fainter with each step the horse took, until they were nothing but distant echoes on the evening wind. Verity leaned back against the stranger's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through the worn fabric of his shirt. She didn't know his name, didn't know where they were going or what would happen next. All she knew was that for the first time since her mother had taken to her bed, She felt like she could breathe. The stars were just beginning to show themselves in the darkening sky when she finally found the courage to ask, "What's your name, Mr.?" "Jedediah," he answered after a moment. "Jedediah Cole, but most folks just call me Cole." "Where are we going, Mr. Cole?" "Somewhere safe," he said simply. "Somewhere you can be a child instead of a burden." And as they rode on into the gathering darkness, leaving the Hutchins homestead and all its cruelties behind, Verity allowed herself to believe that such a place might actually exist. The cabin emerged from the darkness like a promise kept, its wooden walls silver gray in the moonlight. It sat nestled against a hillside, protected from the worst of the prairie winds by a stand of cottonwood trees that whispered secrets to the stars. Smoke drifted from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine and something else, the smell of home, though Verity had never known a true home to recognize it. Cole dismounted first, his movements careful not to jostle the child who'd fallen into exhausted sleep against his chest. She stirred as he lifted her down, her eyes blinking open like a newborn fawn's. "Easy there," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet. "We're here." The cabin wasn't much to look at. Single room with a lean-to addition, a covered porch that had seen better days, and a small corral where 2 horses dozed hip-shot in the darkness. But it was clean. Verity could tell even from outside. The windows gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and the porch had been swept clear of dust and debris. Cole pushed open the door, and warmth spilled out like honey from a jar. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with tools, traps, and a few books on a rough-hewn shelf. The furniture was sparse but solid, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fire, and a bed in the corner covered with a quilt that looked hand-stitched. "It ain't much," Cole said, setting down his saddlebags. "But it's warm and dry, and there's no meanness in these walls." Verity stood just inside the doorway, unsure what to do with herself. In the Hutchins house, she'd learned to make herself small, to take up as little space as possible. Here, in this stranger's home, she didn't know the rules. Cole moved to the fire, adding another log before turning to study her. In the firelight, she could see his face more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 winters, with lines carved by sun and wind rather than age. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his weathered skin. "You hungry?" he asked. Verity nodded, then remembered her manners. "Yes, sir. Please, sir." Something flickered across Cole's face. Not quite a frown, not quite sadness. "Just Cole is fine. No need for sir in this house." He moved to a shelf near the small stove, pulling down a pot and various supplies. His movements were efficient, practiced, those of a man used to caring for himself. Soon, the smell of beans and salt pork filled the cabin, making Verity's stomach clench with hunger. While the food heated, Cole disappeared into the lean-to, returning with blankets and a pillow. He arranged them on the floor near the fire, creating a makeshift bed. "This'll do for tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we'll see about something more permanent." Verity watched him work, confusion warring with exhaustion in her young mind. "Why?" she asked finally, the word escaping before she could stop it. Cole paused in his arrangements, looking up at her. "Why what? Why did you take me? You don't know me. I'm not your kin. The Hutchins, they'll make trouble for you." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. Then he moved to the rocking chair, sitting down with a soft creak of wood. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to the floor near his feet. "Let me tell you something." Verity sat, tucking her legs beneath her dirty dress. Up close, she could see the calluses on his hands, the way his fingers moved absently over a worn spot on the chair's arm. 4 years ago, Cole began, his voice low and measured. "I had a sister. Hannah was her name. Prettiest thing you ever saw, with a laugh like church bells on Sunday morning. She married young, to a man who showed one face to the world and another behind closed doors." He paused, staring into the fire. Verity waited, recognizing the weight of untold story in his silence. I was away, working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. Didn't know how bad things had gotten until I got word she was dead. Fell down the stairs, they said, accident. They said, his hands tightened on the chair arms. But I knew Hannah, sure-footed as a mountain goat, and I saw the bruises they tried to cover with powder and pretty words. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, an owl called, lonely in the darkness. By the time I got back, she was already in the ground. Her husband had moved on, taken himself a new wife. The town, they all knew the truth of it, but nobody wanted to make waves. Nobody wanted to get involved. Cole's voice had gone hard as flint. I learned something then. Evil thrives when good folks turn their backs and pretend not to see. He looked down at Verity then, his expression softening. When I rode past your place today, I saw the women at the well down the road, whispering. Heard enough to know what was happening. Could have kept riding, told myself it wasn't my business, but I kept thinking about Hannah, about how maybe if just one person had stood up, had said, enough. So you came, Verity whispered. So I came, Cole confirmed. And I saw a little girl holding her mama's hand, brave as any soldier I've known. Figured anyone with that kind of courage deserved a chance at something better. The beans were bubbling now, filling the cabin with their savory scent. Cole rose, spooning generous portions into 2 bowls. He handed one to Verity along with a spoon, then sat back down with his own. They ate in companionable silence. The only sounds, the crackle of the fire and the distant yip of coyotes. The food was simple but hot and filling, and Verity cleaned her bowl down to the last bean. Thank you, she said softly, setting the empty bowl aside. Cole nodded, collecting the dishes and setting them in a bucket to soak. There's washing water in that pitcher, he said, pointing to a stand near the door. Get yourself cleaned up some, then we'll see about sleep. Verity washed her face and hands, the cool water revealing just how dirty she'd gotten. The towel came away grimy, and she folded it carefully, ashamed. I'm sorry, she began, but Cole waved her words away. Nothing to be sorry for. Towels wash clean, same as people. He showed her to the makeshift bed, watching as she settled onto the blankets. They were softer than anything at the Hutchins place, smelling of sage and wood smoke. Mr. Cole? Verity asked as he moved to bank the fire for the night. Just Cole, he reminded her gently. Cole, what happens tomorrow? Will the Hutchins come? He turned from the fire, his silhouette tall and solid in the dying light. Maybe they will, but that's tomorrow's worry. Tonight, you're safe. Tonight, you can sleep without fear. That's all anyone can promise. Just tonight. But sometimes, tonight is enough. Verity pulled the blanket up to her chin, a strange feeling blooming in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as the absence of fear. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she wasn't listening for angry footsteps, wasn't tensing for sharp words or sharper hands. Cole settled into the rocking chair, pulling out a knife and a piece of wood. The soft scrape of blade on wood joined the symphony of night sounds. Aren't you going to sleep? Verity asked drowsily. In a bit, Cole replied. Got some thinking to do first. About what? About tomorrow. About what a 7-year-old girl needs that a worn-out cowboy might be able to provide. Verity wanted to tell him that he'd already provided the most important thing. Safety. Kindness. The radical act of caring what happened to her. But sleep was pulling at her like river current, and the words dissolved before she could form them. The last thing she remembered was the steady scrape of his knife on wood, and the absolute certainty that if trouble came in the night, Cole would be ready for it. It was a new feeling, being protected rather than neglected, and she held on to it as she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd known since her mother took ill. Cole sat in the rocking chair long into the night, carving and thinking. The piece of wood in his hand slowly took shape, a small horse. Legs caught mid-gallop, mane flying free. His hands knew the work without his mind's attention, leaving him free to ponder the enormity of what he'd done. He'd acted on instinct, on anger at seeing another woman broken by cruel hands while others stood by. But now, with a child sleeping trustfully by his fire, the weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a yoke. What did he know about raising a little girl? His life was hard edges and long silences, cattle drives and cold camps. He could break a horse, track a man through bare rock, survive on beans and bitter coffee for weeks at a time. But combing a child's hair, teaching her letters, helping her grow into the kind of woman her mother would have wanted her to be. The knife paused in its work as Cole looked down at Verity's sleeping form. In the firelight, she looked even smaller than her 7 years, fragile as a bird's egg. But he remembered the steel in her spine as she'd whispered her choice to leave, the courage it had taken to trust a stranger over her own blood kin. "Well, Flora Hutchins," he murmured to the darkness. "I may not know much about raising daughters, but I promise you this. She'll never know another cruel hand, not while I draw breath." The owl called again, closer now, and Cole took it as agreement. He set aside the carved horse, placing it on the mantel where Verity would see it come morning. Then he pulled his rifle across his lap and settled back in the chair. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. The Hutchins might come, or the sheriff, or the weight of town opinion. But tonight, a little girl slept safe and warm, and sometimes that was victory enough. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that danced like memories on the walls. And Jedediah Cole kept watch, as he would keep watch for many nights to come, guardian of a trust he'd never sought but would never abandon. The morning came gentle as a mother's touch, sunlight filtering through the cabin windows to paint golden squares on the rough plank floor. Verity woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, rhythmic and steady as a heartbeat. For a moment, confusion gripped her. Where were the harsh voices, the slamming doors, the constant undercurrent of anger that had marked mornings at the Hutchins place? Then memory returned, and with it, a curious lightness in her chest. She sat up, the quilt falling away, and saw the small wooden horse on the mantel, caught forever in its wild gallop. Through the window, she could see Cole at the woodpile, sleeves rolled up despite the morning chill, splitting logs with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. His hat was pushed back on his head, and sweat gleamed on his brow despite the cool air. The pile of split wood grew steadily beside him, ready for the stove and fireplace. Verity rose quietly, folding the blankets with careful hands. At the Hutchins house, she'd learned to be useful, to anticipate needs before they were voiced. But here, she wasn't sure what was expected of her. The door creaked as she opened it, and Cole paused mid-swing. Looking up, "Morning, little one. Sleep well?" "Yes, sir. Cole." The name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar for a man who was still mostly stranger. "Can I help?" Cole drove the axe into the chopping block, leaving it standing upright. "You can help by eating something. There's biscuits and molasses on the table, and the coffee's still warm if you've a mind for it." "I can work," Verity insisted, moving down the porch steps. "I'm good at carrying wood, and I can sweep, and—" "Whoa there," Cole interrupted gently, holding up a hand. "Nobody's saying you can't work, but eating comes first. Can't build strength on an empty stomach." He guided her back inside, his hand light on her shoulder. The biscuits were still warm, and the molasses was thick and sweet. Cole poured her a cup of coffee, adding a generous amount of cream and sugar without her having to ask. "Most folks say coffee'll stunt a child's growth," he said with something that might have been a smile. "But I figure you've got enough troubles without worrying about being tall." They ate in companionable silence, Cole washing down his biscuits with black coffee while Verity savored hers. Through the open door, she could see the morning spreading across the land, painting the grass gold and casting long shadows from the cottonwoods. "After breakfast," Cole said. "Thought we might ride into town. You'll need some things, clothes, shoes that fit proper. And I need to speak to a few folks." Fear flickered in Verity's stomach. "The Hutchins?" "Won't lay a hand on you." Cole finished firmly. "Not while you're with me, but we can't hide out here forever. Better to face things head on. Let folks know how it's going to be." After breakfast, Cole saddled his bay gelding and lifted Verity up, settling her in front of him like the night before. The ride to town took near an hour, following a track that wound through grassland and over a small creek that gurgled with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Perdition Creek looked different in daylight, smaller, shabbier, its grand ambitions worn down by wind and disappointment. The main street was rutted deep from wagon wheels, and half the storefronts needed paint. But it was busy enough for a Saturday morning, folks going about their business with the purposeful air of people with work to do. Their arrival caused a stir. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned to track their progress down the street. Verity could feel the weight of eyes, heard the whispers that started before they'd even passed. "That's him, the one who took the Hutchins girl." "Bold as brass. Riding in like that. Sarah says he threatened Samuel with a gun." Cole seemed not to notice, riding steady and calm toward the general store. He dismounted smooth as water, lifting Verity down and keeping her hand in his as they climbed the steps to Thornton's Mercantile. The bell above the door jangled their arrival, and Mrs. Thornton looked up from her ledger with eyes sharp as pins. She was a thin woman, all angles and disapproval, who'd never had a kind word for Flora Hutchins in life. "Mr. Cole," she said, her tone suggesting she'd bitten into something sour. "Heard you had some excitement out at the Hutchins place yesterday." "Heard you had some excitement there for the past 3 years," Cole replied evenly. "Funny how nobody mentioned that particular news." "Mrs." Thornton's mouth thinned to a line. "I don't see how that's—" "The child needs clothes," Cole interrupted. "2 dresses, undergarments, stockings, and shoes that fit. Good quality. Nothing fancy. I'm not sure we can extend credit." Cole reached into his vest pocket, pulling out several silver dollars that rang as he set them on the counter. "Don't recall asking for credit." The sight of hard money changed Mrs. Thornton's expression considerably. She bustled around the counter, measuring Verity with practiced eyes and pulling items from shelves. The dresses were simple calico, one blue and one brown, but they were clean and new and smelled of fresh cloth instead of fear. While Mrs. Thornton wrapped their purchases, the door jangled again. Verity's heart sank as Sheriff Daniels walked in, his badge catching the light from the window. He was a big man running to fat, with pale eyes that never seemed to focus quite right. "Cole," he said, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. "Been looking for you." "Have you now?" Cole said mildly, continuing to count out coins for Mrs. Thornton. "The Hutchins boys came by my office. Say you stole their niece. Hard to steal something that was thrown away." Cole's voice remained calm, but Verity could feel the tension in his hand where it rested on her shoulder. "Ask them what they planned for her. Ask them why Flora Hutchins died looking like she'd been trampled by horses." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Now, that's family business." "Not anymore." Cole turned to face him fully, and something in his stance made the sheriff take a half step back. "The girl's with me now, legal-like, if need be. I'll speak to Judge Patterson about it directly. The Hutchins are her blood kin. The Hutchins are the reason her mother's being measured for a pine box as we speak." Cole's voice had gone quiet, which somehow made it more frightening. "You want to stand there and tell me blood matters more than safety? Sheriff? Want to explain that to the town? To the territory marshal when he makes his rounds?" Sheriff Daniels' face had gone red, then pale. Everyone knew he owed his position to looking the other way at the right times, and a territorial investigation was the last thing he wanted. "Now, Cole, no need for threats." "No threat, just truth. The girl stays with me. The Hutchins stay away from her. That's the whole of it." The bell jangled again, and this time it was Constance Muller who entered, the elderly widow who'd brought soup to Flora. She took in the scene with quick eyes, then moved to Verity's side with surprising speed. "Land sakes, child. Look how thin you are." She tutted, ignoring the tension in the room entirely. "Jedediah Cole. You bring this girl by my place this afternoon. She needs feeding up. And you need to learn how to braid hair proper. Can't have her running wild like a Mustang colt." "Mrs. Muller," the sheriff began, but she rounded on him with the fearlessness of a woman who'd outlived 3 husbands and had no patience left for fools. "Henry Daniels, don't you start. We all know what went on in that house. We all share the shame of letting it happen. Least we can do now is see the child's cared for proper." She turned back to Cole, her weathered face soft with something like approval. "My place, 2 o'clock. I'll have stew on and maybe some apple cake if this one's good." She winked at Verity, who managed a tiny smile in return. After that, the sheriff seemed to deflate. He muttered something about checking into things and left, the bell jangling his retreat. Mrs. Thornton finished wrapping their purchases in brown paper, her movements quick and nervous. Outside, Cole loaded the packages onto his horse, then lifted Verity up again. As they rode back through town, more folks watched their passage. But something had shifted. A few men touched their hat brims in acknowledgement. A woman sweeping her porch raised her hand in a tentative wave. "Change comes slow to places like this," Cole said quietly, feeling Verity's tension. "But it comes, Mrs. Muller speaking up like that. That matters. Others will follow." They made 2 more stops, the undertaker's, where Cole paid for Flora's burial and chose a spot in the cemetery with a view of the mountains, and the judge's house at the end of Main Street. Judge Patterson was ancient as Moses but sharp as a new blade, and he listened to Cole's brief explanation with keen eyes. "Bring her by Monday," he said finally. "We'll draw up papers, make it legal. The Hutchins won't like it, but they won't fight it either, not if they know what's good for them." The ride back to the cabin was quiet, Verity processing all she'd seen and heard. The packages bounced gently against the horse's flanks. New clothes, new shoes, the promise of a new life. But it was Mrs. Muller's fierce defense that stuck in her mind, the way she'd stood up to the sheriff without a moment's fear. "Cole," she asked as the cabin came into view, "why did Mrs. Muller help us?" Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe she remembered what it was like to be young and scared and alone. Sometimes folks surprise you. "Little one, sometimes they remember how to be brave." As they dismounted at the cabin, Verity thought about bravery, her mother's quiet courage in the face of cruelty, Cole's different kind of courage in taking her in, Mrs. Muller's courage in speaking truth to authority. Maybe courage wasn't always about being fearless. Maybe sometimes it was about doing what was right despite the fear. 2 o'clock, she asked, looking up at Cole. He nodded, the ghost of a smile crossing his weathered features. 2 o'clock. Best we don't keep Mrs. Muller waiting. I've faced down bandits and rattlesnakes, but that woman could teach them both about being fearsome. And for the first time since her mother had fallen ill, Verity felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside. It was small and uncertain, like a creek in drought time, but it was there. Cole's smile widened just a fraction, and together they went inside to put away their purchases and prepare for an afternoon of stew, apple cake, and the terrifying prospect of properly braided hair. The days began to take on a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. Mornings came with the rooster's crow from the Garrett farm down the valley, and Verity would wake to find Cole already at work, mending fence, tending horses, or fixing something around the cabin that had gotten along fine broken but worked better whole. She'd dress in one of her new dresses, the fabric still stiff with newness, and set about making herself useful. At first, she moved like a ghost, silent and careful, waiting for the harsh word that never came. She swept floors that were already clean, folded blankets that didn't need folding, always watching Cole from the corner of her eye for signs of displeasure. But as the days passed and his patience never wavered, something began to ease in her chest. "You don't have to work every minute," Cole told her one morning, finding her scrubbing the already spotless table. "Children are allowed to play, you know, I don't know how, Verity admitted, then immediately wished she could swallow the words back. At the Hutchins place. Such an admission would have earned mockery at best, but Cole just nodded thoughtfully. Reckon we'll have to learn together then. Never had much practice at playing myself. That afternoon, he showed her how to whistle through a blade of grass, how to skip stones across the creek, how to spot shapes in the clouds. His demonstrations were solemn and careful, as if these were skills as important as reading or ciphering. When Verity's stone skipped 3 times before sinking, his smile was worth more than gold. Mrs. Muller had become a regular visitor, arriving every few days with food, advice, and a determination to civilize what she called "you two wild creatures." She taught Verity to braid her own hair, to mend a tear so it barely showed, to tell by the smell when bread was done baking. Under her tutelage, the cabin began to take on small touches of home: curtains at the windows, a tablecloth for Sundays, wild flowers in a mason jar. "A place needs a woman's touch," Mrs. Muller declared, watching Verity arrange the flowers with careful concentration. "Even if that woman is only 7 years old." Cole bore these invasions with good grace, though he drew the line at doilies. "A man's got to have some standards," he'd mutter. But Verity noticed he never actually removed any of Mrs. Muller's improvements. The work around the homestead continued, and Verity found her place in it. She gathered eggs from the chickens Cole had acquired from a neighbor, fed the horses their morning grain, helped plant a kitchen garden in the patch of ground behind the cabin. Her hands, which had known only indoor work, learned the feel of earth and growing things. One afternoon, as she knelt in the garden pulling weeds, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Fear shot through her like lightning, even after weeks of safety. The sound of riders still made her heart race, but Cole, repairing the corral fence nearby, merely straightened and waited, his hand casual but ready near his hip. The rider was Tom Garrett, their nearest neighbor to the west. He was a young man, barely 20, with an open face and ears that stuck out like jug handles. "Afternoon, Cole," he called, dismounting with more enthusiasm than grace. "Miss Verity." Verity ducked her head shyly. Tom had been by before, always finding some excuse, returning a tool he'd borrowed, sharing news from town, bringing his mother's extra preserves. Cole had watched these visits with what might have been amusement. "What brings you by, Tom?" Cole asked, though his tone suggested he knew perfectly well. "Ma wanted to know if you folks would come to Sunday dinner," Tom said, his ears going red. "She's fixing to make her famous fried chicken, and there'll be music after. My sister Mary plays the fiddle real pretty." Cole glanced at Verity, who was trying to hide her excitement. They'd been to town for supplies and for Flora's burial, a small, quiet ceremony attended by more people than Verity had expected. But this would be their first social call. "Reckon we could manage that," Cole said. "What time?" "After church lets out, around 1 o'clock. Tom's whole face lit up. "That's wonderful. I mean, Ma will be pleased, real pleased." After Tom left, trailing dust and happiness, Verity looked up at Cole uncertainly. "Do you think... will people talk?" Cole set down his hammer, giving her his full attention. "People always talk. Little one, question is whether we let their talking change how we live." He knelt down to her level, his gray eyes serious. "The Garretts are good people. They knew your mama, respected her. They want to know you for who you are, not whose blood you carry. That's worth more than avoiding gossip." Sunday came bright and clear, with a breeze that carried the scent of prairie roses. Verity wore her blue dress, the one she'd been saving for special. And Cole had made an effort too. His shirt was clean and pressed, his boots polished to a shine. He'd even trimmed his beard, though it did little to soften the hard planes of his face. The Garrett farm was larger than Cole's place, with a proper 2-story house and a barn that didn't lean. Children spilled out of the door as they arrived. Tom's younger siblings, ranging from a boy nearly Verity's age to a toddler still unsteady on her feet. They surrounded Verity immediately, pulling her into their games with the casual acceptance of children who hadn't yet learned to be cruel. Mrs. Garrett was a comfortable woman with Tom's same kind eyes and a way of making everyone feel welcome. She pressed a glass of lemonade into Verity's hand and shooed the children out to play, chatting all the while about inconsequential things, the weather, her garden, the new calico at Thornton's store. It was the kind of normal, everyday talk that Verity had been starved for, and she soaked it up like sunshine. The meal was everything Tom had promised: crispy fried chicken, mashed potatoes smooth as cream, green beans cooked with bacon, and biscuits so light they might have floated away. Verity ate until her stomach hurt, unaccustomed to such bounty. Under the table, the youngest Garrett girl pressed close to her side, chattering about her doll and her kitten and the tooth she'd lost last week. After dinner, they moved to the porch, where Tom's sister Mary proved the rumors true with her fiddle. The music was lively and sweet by turns, filling the afternoon with melody. Mr. Garrett produced a harmonica, and soon others joined in: spoons, a washboard, Tom's enthusiastic if slightly off-key singing. Cole sat in a rocking chair, seemingly content to watch and listen. But when Mary struck up a slow waltz, Mrs. Garrett nudged him with her elbow. "A gentleman should dance," she said firmly, "especially when there's a young lady who's never learned how." Verity's eyes widened as Cole rose, extending his hand to her with exaggerated formality. "Miss Verity, might I have this dance?" Her face flushed hot, but she took his hand, letting him lead her to the cleared space that served as a dance floor. His big hands were gentle as he showed her where to put her feet, how to follow his lead. She stepped on his boots more than once, but he never winced, just adjusted and continued. "You're doing fine," he murmured when she apologized for the third time. "Dancing's just walking to music, when you get down to it." Around them, other couples joined in: the Garrett parents, Tom with his giggling sister. The afternoon sun slanted golden through the cottonwoods, and for a moment, Verity forgot to be afraid, forgot to be careful. She was just a girl dancing on a summer afternoon, safe in the circle of makeshift family. When they rode home as evening approached, Verity was pleasantly tired, her head full of music and laughter. She leaned back against Cole's chest, watching the stars begin to appear in the deepening sky. "Did you have a good time?" Cole asked. "The best time," Verity said softly. Then, more hesitantly, "Do you think Mama would be happy? That I had fun, I mean, even though—" "Especially though," Cole said firmly. "Your Mama wanted you to have a good life. Verity, every smile, every laugh, every moment of happiness. That's what she'd want for you. We honor the dead by living well, not by stopping our lives where theirs ended." Verity thought about that as they rode through the gathering darkness. At the Hutchins place, she'd been expected to be a shadow, silent and useful and asking for nothing. Here, with Cole and Mrs. Muller and now the Garretts, she was learning to be a person, someone who could laugh and dance and eat too much fried chicken at Sunday dinner. "Cole?" she said as the cabin came into view, warm lamplight spilling from the windows where Mrs. Muller had promised to wait with their supper. "Yeah, little one. I'm glad you came that day. To the house, I mean—" Cole's arm tightened briefly around her. "So am I. Verity, so am I." The stars were fully out now, scattered across the sky like spilled silver. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called, and another answered. The world felt vast and full of possibility, no longer the narrow, frightening place it had been just weeks before. And Verity May Hutchins, riding safe in the circle of her guardian's arms, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved every bit of the happiness this new life might bring. The morning started like any other, with mist rising from the creek and the rooster announcing dawn. But something in the air felt different, a tension like the atmosphere before a storm. Though the sky was clear as glass, Verity felt it as she gathered eggs, the chickens seeming more skittish than usual. And Cole must have sensed it too because he kept his rifle closer than normal as he worked. The sound of hoofbeats came just after breakfast, multiple riders moving fast. Verity's hands stilled on the dish she was drying, her body going rigid with remembered fear. Cole set down his coffee cup with a deliberate calm, moving to the window with casual grace that didn't quite hide his readiness. "Stay inside," he said quietly, checking the loads in his revolver. "Whatever happens, you stay inside." Through the window, Verity could see them coming, 4 riders raising dust like a cavalry charge. The Hutchins brothers led the way, Samuel and Josiah, with 2 other men she didn't recognize. They reined up hard in front of the cabin, horses dancing and blowing from the hard ride. Cole stepped out onto the porch, rifle held easy in his hands, but ready. "Gentlemen, bit early for a social call." Samuel Hutchins had always been the meanest of the brothers, with eyes like a snake and a smile that promised pain. He leaned forward in his saddle, that smile playing at his lips now. "Come for what's ours. Cole, the girl belongs with her kin. Judge Patterson says different." Cole replied evenly. "Papers all legal and proper. You want to argue it? Take it up with the court." Josiah spat tobacco juice, the stream landing just shy of the porch steps. "Papers, like some piece of paper changes blood." "No," Cole agreed. "But it changes who's responsible for her welfare. And considering how you folks handled that responsibility with her mother, I'd say the change is overdue." The 2 strangers shifted restlessly. Verity recognized the type. Hired muscle, the kind of men who do ugly work for drinking money. One had a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. The other kept his hand near his gun like it was a comfort. "Now see here," Samuel said, his false reasonableness more frightening than shouting would have been. "We've been patient. Let you play house with the girl. Figured you'd get tired of it. But family is family. She's got Hutchins blood, and that means she comes home over my dead body." Cole said softly, "That can be arranged," the scarred man said, speaking for the first time. The moment stretched taut as wire. Inside, Verity pressed against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought they must be able to hear it outside. This was her fault. Cole was in danger because of her, might die because of her, and the thought was unbearable. She remembered her mother's words, whispered through bloody lips, "Be strong, my girl." But what did strength look like for a 7-year-old girl? How could she be strong when grown men with guns were deciding her fate? The answer came with startling clarity. Strength was speaking truth when lies would be easier. Strength was standing up when cowering was safer. Her mother had been strong right up to the end, never begging, never breaking completely despite everything they'd done to her, before she could lose her nerve. Verity pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch. "Verity, get back inside," Cole said sharply, not taking his eyes off the men. But she moved to stand beside him, her chin lifted despite the trembling in her legs. "No, this is about me. I should have a say." Samuel's snake eyes fixed on her. "There's my niece. Come on down here, girl. Time to come home where you belong." "That place was never home," Verity said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Home is where people care if you live or die. Home is where nobody hits you for crying when your mama's sick. You watch your tongue." Josiah growled. "Speaking ill of your kin." "You're not my kin," Verity interrupted, finding courage in Cole's solid presence beside her. "Kin doesn't stand by while someone suffers. Kin doesn't laugh about it over whiskey on the porch. You might share my blood, but you're not my family." Samuel's face had gone dark as thunderclouds. "You've got opinions now, do you? Cole been filling your head with notions?" "Cole taught me I'm worth more than being somebody's burden," Verity said. "My mama tried to teach me that too, but it was hard to believe when everyone treated us like we were less than the dirt they walked on." "Your mama was weak," Martha Hutchins said, appearing from behind the men like a crow settling on carrion. "Couldn't handle a little discipline, but you've got Hutchins blood. We can make something of you yet." "Like you made something of my mama?" Verity asked. "She was good and kind and worked harder than anyone. And you all destroyed her piece by piece because nobody stopped you. Enough of this, the scarred man said, shifting his hand closer to his gun. We came for the girl. We're taking the girl. Try it, Cole said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that raised the hair on Verity's neck. See how far you get. But it was the sound of more hoofbeats that broke the standoff. Coming up the trail was Mrs. Muller in her buggy. But she wasn't alone. Tom Garrett rode alongside, and behind them came Judge Patterson himself, along with Sheriff Daniels and what looked like half the town. Having a party without inviting us? Mrs. Muller called out, her voice carrying sharp disapproval. How rude! Samuel Hutchins! The judge, despite his years, sat straight in his saddle. His voice carried the authority of law and decades of respect. Heard there might be some dispute about custody arrangements. Thought I'd come clarify matters personally. Judge, Samuel started, but Patterson cut him off with a gesture. The papers are legal and binding. Miss Verity is under the guardianship of Jedediah Cole until she reaches her majority or other arrangements are made by the court. Any attempt to interfere with that arrangement is kidnapping under territorial law. She's our blood, Josiah began. Your blood? Mrs. Muller's voice could have stripped paint. Where was that blood when Flora needed help? Where was that blood when she was dying? I'll tell you where. Sitting on the porch, drinking and laughing. Tom Garrett moved his horse closer, his usual cheerful face set in hard lines. Mister, Cole's been nothing but good to that girl. Fed her, clothed her, got her smiling again. That's more than you folks ever did. This ain't your business, boy, Samuel snarled. It's all our business. Judge Patterson said firmly, the welfare of children is the business of any civilized community. We failed Flora Hutchins. I'll not see us fail her daughter, too. Sheriff Daniels, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up. Samuel, Josiah, you boys best head on home and take your friends with you. Any more trouble about this matter, and I'll have to take official action. The threat was weak from a weak man, but backed by the judge and the weight of community opinion, it carried enough force. The scarred man looked to Samuel, who sat rigid in his saddle, fury radiating from every line of his body. This ain't over, Samuel said finally. That girl's got Hutchins' blood. Sooner or later, blood tells. Yes, Verity said quietly. It does. My mama's blood tells in me every day. It tells me to be kind when the world is cruel, to be strong when everything wants to break me, to choose love over hate, even when hate would be easier. She looked at each of the Hutchins clan in turn, memorizing their faces. I'm not afraid of you anymore. My mama was, because she had no choice. But I have Cole now. I have Mrs. Muller and the Garretts and people who see me as more than property. I have choices my mama never did. Martha's face had gone white with rage. You ungrateful little... Careful, Cole said softly. There are lines that shouldn't be crossed, not in front of witnesses. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Samuel yanked his horse's head around, spurring the animal harder than necessary. Come on, we're done here. The others followed, Josiah spitting once more for emphasis before wheeling his mount. Martha gave Verity one last venomous look before climbing back into the wagon they'd brought, probably to haul Verity away in. The town folks stayed until the Hutchins were well out of sight, a protective circle that made Verity's chest tight with gratitude. Judge Patterson rode close, leaning down from his saddle. You spoke well, young lady. Your mother would be proud. Thank you, sir, Verity whispered, suddenly exhausted now that the danger had passed. Mrs. Muller climbed down from her buggy, gathering Verity into her arms. Brave girl. Foolish, maybe, coming outside like that, but brave. I couldn't let Cole face them alone, Verity said into the woman's shoulder. Not when it was about me. That's what family does. Mrs. Muller said firmly. Real family. They stand together, as the crowd gradually dispersed, with promises to keep an eye out and offers of help if needed. Cole knelt down to Verity's level. His gray eyes were serious but warm. You didn't have to do that, he said. I would have handled it. I know, Verity said. But I needed to. For me, for Mama. To show them they don't own me anymore. Cole nodded slowly, understanding in his weathered face. You've got your mother's courage, Verity May, and that's worth more than all the Hutchins blood in creation. As the sun climbed higher, warming away the morning's chill, Verity stood on the porch between Cole and Mrs. Muller, watching the dust settle on the trail. The Hutchins would be back, probably, in one form or another. Mean spirits like theirs didn't give up easy, but she wasn't the same frightened girl who'd whispered her mother's death watch just weeks ago. She had people now, a community that had finally decided to see and act. She had Cole, steady as mountain stone. She had choices, and most importantly, she had found her voice, the voice her mother had tried so hard to preserve. Even as her own was silenced, that voice would only grow stronger with time, and Verity made a silent promise to her mother's memory. She would use it. She would speak for those who couldn't, stand for those who were beaten down, be the kind of woman Flora Hutchins had dreamed of raising. The morning's confrontation had shaken something loose in Perdition Creek, like a festered wound finally draining. It wasn't healing. Not yet, but it was a start. And sometimes, Verity was learning. A start was all you needed to change everything. The weeks following the confrontation settled into an uneasy peace, like the stillness between lightning and thunder. Word of what had happened spread through Perdition Creek faster than wildfire, growing and changing with each telling until Verity hardly recognized the story. In some versions, Cole had faced down a dozen men. In others, Verity had delivered a speech that made grown men weep. The truth, as always, lay somewhere quieter and more complicated. The change showed in small ways at first. When Cole and Verity went to town for supplies, conversations no longer stopped dead at their approach. Women who had previously crossed the street now nodded in greeting. Men who had avoided Cole's eye now touched their hat brims in acknowledgement. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was no longer cold indifference. At Thornton's Mercantile, Mrs. Thornton actually managed something approaching a smile when Verity carefully counted out coins for penny candy. Your reading's coming along well, I hear, she said, almost kindly. Mrs. Muller says you're quick with your letters. Yes, ma'am, Verity replied, still wary but willing to accept the olive branch. Cole helps me practice in the evenings. The woman's face softened a fraction more. Your mother would be pleased. She always did value education, even when... She trailed off, decades of habit stopping her from speaking ill of the Hutchins men even now. But not everyone in town was ready to let the past lie. There were still those who whispered behind their hands, who believed blood would tell, and that taking in a Hutchins was asking for trouble. Verity heard the whispers, saw the looks, felt the weight of their judgment. That's Hutchins blood in her veins. She overheard Mrs. Clayton saying to her companion outside the church, Mark my words, Cole will rue the day he took her in. Bad blood always shows itself. The words stung like nettles. But Verity had learned from Cole that the best response to cruel words was often dignified silence. She walked past with her head high, though her hands trembled as she climbed into the wagon. Cole noticed. Of course, he noticed everything when it came to her well-being. You all right, little one? People think I'm going to turn out bad, Verity said quietly. Because of my name, because of whose blood I carry. Cole was quiet for a moment as he guided the horses out of town. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You know what I think about blood? Verity shook her head. I think it's just something that keeps a body alive. Doesn't make you good or bad, kind or cruel. Those are choices a person makes every day. Your mother had the same blood as the Hutchins, didn't she? And she was one of the gentlest souls I ever heard tell of. But what if they're right? Verity asked, voicing the fear that kept her awake some nights. What if there's something mean in me, waiting to come out? Cole pulled the wagon to a stop beside the creek, turning to face her fully. Verity May, I want you to listen careful now. Every person alive has got meanness in them. And kindness, too. What matters is which one you feed. You feed meanness with hate and selfishness and cruelty. You feed kindness with love and generosity and compassion. From what I've seen, you've been feeding the right one." That evening, as Verity practiced her letters by lamplight, a knock came at the door. Cole answered with his usual caution, relaxing when he saw Tom Garrett on the porch. "Evening, Cole. Miss Verity." Tom's ears were red as always, but his expression was serious. "Thought you should know. There's been talk in town. The Hutchins brothers have been drinking heavy at Murphy's saloon, making threats." "What kind of threats?" Cole asked, though his tone suggested he could guess. "The kind that worry me if I had a young girl to protect." Tom said carefully, "My PA thinks they're just blowing smoke, but smoke can turn to fire quick enough." Cole finished. "I appreciate the warning." "Tom." After Tom left, Verity looked up from her slate. "Are we in danger?" Cole considered his words carefully. He'd never lied to her, never treated her like she was too young for truth. "Could be, men like that. They don't like being told no. But don't you worry. I've dealt with worse than the Hutchins brothers." But worry she did, especially when Cole started wearing his gun even for simple chores around the homestead. When he taught her how to load the rifle and where to hide if trouble came. When he made sure she knew the way to the Garrett farm by heart, just in case. The tension in town grew thicker as the days passed. The Hutchins brothers made their presence felt, swaggering down Main Street, making sure everyone knew they hadn't forgotten or forgiven. They didn't approach Cole directly, but their message was clear. This wasn't over. It was Mrs. Muller who brought things to a head, in her own inimitable way. She marched into Murphy's saloon one afternoon, a shocking breach of propriety that had the whole town talking within the hour, and faced down Samuel Hutchins, where he sat nursing a whiskey. "You listen here, Samuel Hutchins," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the establishment. "That girl is thriving for the first time in her life. She's learning her letters, helping with the garden, smiling like a child should. If you had 1 ounce of decency in your soul, you'd be glad for her instead of plotting mischief." Samuel's face had gone dark with rage. "You don't tell me about my own kin. You meddling old... I'll tell you about human decency, which you and yours seem to have forgotten." "Mrs. Muller interrupted. "Flora died because of your family's cruelty. Don't compound that sin by trying to destroy her daughter's chance at happiness. The girl belongs with blood," Josiah said from his seat nearby. "That's nature's way. Nature's way, Mrs." Muller's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You want to talk about nature's way? Nature's way is for the strong to protect the weak, for communities to care for their young. What you did to Flora, what you do to Verity, that's not nature. That's just meanness dressed up in fancy words." She turned to address the room at large, the assembled men shrinking under her gaze. "Every one of you knows what went on in that house. Every one of you who kept silent shares the guilt. But we have a chance now to do right by that child. Are we going to take it? Or are we going to fail her like we failed her mother?" The silence that followed was deafening. Men studied their drinks, the floor, anything but Mrs. Muller's accusing eyes. "Finally!" Old Walter Henderson spoke up from his corner table. "The woman's right," he said gruffly. "We all knew. We all stayed quiet. Least we can do now is make sure the girl's safe with Cole." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Not universal, not enthusiastic, but enough to show which way the wind was blowing. Samuel slammed his glass down, whiskey sloshing. "This town's gone soft," he snarled. "Taking the word of women and children over a man's rights. Only right you seem to recognize is the right to hurt those weaker than you." "Mrs." Muller said coldly. "And yes, this town is changing. Past time it did." When the story reached Cole's cabin that evening, carried by Tom Garrett, who'd heard it from his father, who'd been at the saloon, Verity felt a mix of pride and fear. "She shouldn't have done that," she said. "Made them mad at her because of me. That's not how Mrs. Muller sees it." Cole said, "Way she sees it, she's making up for lost time, for staying quiet when she should have spoken. Takes courage to admit you were wrong and try to make it right." That Sunday at church, the divisions in the town were clear as spring water. The Hutchins clan and their sympathizers sat on one side, faces hard and closed. On the other sat Cole and Verity, surrounded by the Garretts, Mrs. Muller, and a growing number of families who decided that protecting a child mattered more than keeping peace with bullies. Reverend Davis, young and earnest and still finding his voice, delivered a sermon on the Good Samaritan that had pointed relevance. "Who is our neighbor?" he asked, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Is it only those who share our blood, our name, or is it the vulnerable among us, those who need our protection and care?" Verity sat between Cole and Mrs. Muller, wearing her good dress and trying not to fidget. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, some hostile, some sympathetic, all watching to see what would become of the Hutchins girl who'd found refuge with a lonely cowboy. After the service, as folks filed out, Martha Hutchins made a point of brushing past Verity. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she hissed, low enough that only Verity could hear. "Blood always tells. You'll show your true colors soon enough." But before Verity could shrink away, Mrs. Muller's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and protective. "The only colors this child needs to show are her own," she said firmly, loud enough for others to hear. "And from what I've seen, they're colors any family would be proud to claim." As they walked to the wagon, Verity noticed something that made her heart lift despite Martha's cruel words. Young Annie Patterson waved at her from across the churchyard. Billy Garrett called out asking if she wanted to go fishing next Saturday. Small gestures, but they meant she was being seen not as the Hutchins orphan, but as Verity, Cole's ward, Mrs. Muller's unofficially adopted granddaughter, a member of the community in her own right. "It's changing," she said wonderingly as Cole helped her into the wagon. "What is?" he asked. "Everything," Verity said. "The town, how people see me, how I see myself." Cole smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his weathered features. "Change is like spring, little one, come slow, and there's still some cold days mixed in with the warm, but once it starts, there's no stopping it." As they drove home, Verity thought about her mother, lying now in the cemetery under a simple stone that read, "Flora Hutchins, beloved mother." Would she be proud of how her daughter had stood up to the family that had hurt her? Would she be glad that Verity had found safety and love with Cole? "I think she knows," Mrs. Muller said softly, seeming to read Verity's thoughts. "I think she knows you're safe and cared for. That's all any mother wants for her child." The sun was warm on Verity's face as they turned up the track to the cabin. Behind them, the town continued its slow transformation, one heart at a time. The Hutchins might rage and threaten, but something fundamental had shifted. The silence that had protected cruelty for so long was breaking, replaced by voices willing to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. And at the center of it all, a 7-year-old girl was learning that she could be more than her blood, more than her past. She could be exactly who she chose to be, with people who loved her for that choice. It was, Verity thought, what her mother had always wanted for her, the freedom to become herself, unbowed and unbroken. The morning dawned pearl gray and soft, with mist rising from the creek like the earth's own breath. It was the kind of morning that promised change, though Verity couldn't have said why she felt it in her bones. She stood on the porch in her nightdress and shawl, watching Cole tend the horses, when Mrs. Muller's buggy appeared on the trail, earlier than usual and moving with purpose. "Land sakes, child, you'll catch your death," Mrs. Muller called as she climbed down, but her scolding was gentle. She carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper, handling it with unusual care. "What's that?" Verity asked, curious despite the early hour. Mrs. Muller's eyes twinkled with barely suppressed excitement. "Something that should have been done proper the first time. Cole, leave those horses and come here. We have preparations to make." Cole approached, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Preparations for what, exactly?" For a wedding, of course. Mrs., Muller announced, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It's high time you two were a proper family in the eyes of God and law both. Verity's heart skipped. She'd dreamed of it, secretly, in the quiet hours before dawn, of being Cole's daughter not just in practice, but in truth. But she'd never dared voice the wish, afraid it might shatter like spun glass if spoken aloud. Cole went very still, the way he did when something mattered deeply. Mrs. Muller. Don't you Mrs. Muller me. Jedediah Cole. She interrupted. You've been that girl's father in every way that counts for months now. Time to make it official. Reverend Davis is expecting us at 2 o'clock. But, Cole started, then stopped, looking down at Verity. His gray eyes held a question. Would you want that little one to be my daughter, legal and binding? Verity's throat closed up with emotion. She nodded, not trusting her voice, then flew across the space between them to wrap her arms around his waist. Cole's hand settled on her head, gentle as falling snow. Reckon that's answer enough, he said gruffly. Mrs. Muller beamed. Good. Now, let's see about making you both presentable. Can't have my granddaughter, unofficial or otherwise, getting married in her everyday clothes. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a dress that took Verity's breath away. It wasn't fancy by town standards, but it was beautiful. Soft blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered along the hem and sleeves, with matching ribbons for her hair. It was my daughter's. Mrs. Muller said softly. Been saving it all these years, waiting for the right child to wear it. Seems fitting it should be you, considering. Considering what? Verity asked, running reverent fingers over the fabric. Considering you've given this old woman a reason to hope again, to believe that wrongs can be made right, that silence can be broken, that love can grow in the most unlikely places. She cleared her throat, brushing at her eyes. Now, enough sentiment. We have work to do. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Muller insisted on heating water for proper baths, trimming Cole's hair despite his protests, and braiding Verity's hair into an intricate crown that made her feel like a princess from the fairy tales her mother used to whisper in the dark. Tom Garrett arrived just after noon, dressed in his Sunday best and grinning ear to ear. Heard there was a wedding happening. Thought you might need a witness. How did you... Cole began. Mrs. Muller told my ma. Who told Mrs. Henderson? Who told the minister's wife? Tom explained cheerfully. Half the town knows by now. Cole groaned, but Verity could see the smile tugging at his lips. So much for a quiet ceremony. They made an odd procession heading into town, Cole on his bay gelding, Verity riding with Mrs. Muller in the buggy, and Tom bringing up the rear like an honor guard. The dress felt strange and wonderful against Verity's skin, so different from her everyday calico. She kept smoothing the skirt, hardly believing this was real. The church was fuller than she'd expected, not packed, but with enough friendly faces to make her heart swell. The Garretts were there in force. Judge Patterson sat in the front row with his wife, and even some unexpected faces, Mr. Thornton from the Mercantile, the undertaker who'd prepared her mother with such dignity, young Annie Patterson with her parents. Reverend Davis stood at the altar, his kind face wreathed in smiles. But it was Cole who drew Verity's attention as she walked down the aisle on Mrs. Muller's arm. He'd never looked so formal, in a clean white shirt and string tie someone had procured for him. But underneath the unaccustomed finery, he was still Cole, steady, strong, the man who'd saved her from darkness. Dearly beloved, Reverend Davis began, we gather today for an unusual but joyful occasion. Not to join two people in marriage, but to recognize and bless a family that has already formed through love, courage, and divine providence. He spoke of Ruth and Naomi, of chosen families and the bonds that transcend blood. He spoke of redemption and second chances, of community and the sacred duty to protect the vulnerable. Through it all, Verity held tight to Cole's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentleness that spoke of harder-won wisdom. Jedediah Cole, the Reverend said. Do you take this child as your lawful daughter, to raise and protect, to guide and cherish, in sickness and in health, in plenty and in want, until she reaches her majority?" "I do," Cole said, his voice steady as bedrock. "Verity May Hutchins," the Reverend continued, and Verity felt a flutter of sadness at her name. But then he went on, "Soon to be Verity May Cole. Do you take this man as your lawful father and guardian, to honor and obey, to learn from and lean on, in joy and in sorrow?" "I do," Verity whispered. Then louder, "I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and the grace of God above, I declare you father and daughter. What God has brought together, let no man tear asunder." A cheer went up from the assembled crowd. Mrs. Muller was crying openly. Tom Garrett whistled through his fingers, and even Judge Patterson looked suspiciously misty-eyed. But it was the movement at the back of the church that caught Verity's attention. The Hutchins clan stood in the doorway. Samuel, Josiah, and Martha, their face dark with fury. For a moment, the joy in the room faltered, old fears rising like smoke. But then something remarkable happened. Walter Henderson stood up, then Tom's father, then the undertaker, Mr. Thornton, Judge Patterson. One by one, the men of the town rose to their feet, forming a wall between the Hutchins and the new family at the altar. They didn't speak, didn't threaten. They simply stood, and their message was clear. Not here, not today, not ever again. Samuel's face went from red to purple. He opened his mouth, perhaps to rage, perhaps to threaten. But Martha put a hand on his arm, her expression calculating as she took in the unified opposition. Without a word, they turned and left, their retreat marked by the heavy thud of the church doors. "Well," Reverend Davis said into the silence that followed, "I believe this calls for a celebration. Mrs. Davis has prepared refreshments in the church hall, and all are welcome." The party that followed was simple but joyful. There was cake, 2 layers, which seemed impossibly grand to Verity, and lemonade and Mrs. Garrett's famous cookies. The church ladies had decorated the hall with wildflowers and ribbon, transforming the plain space into something magical. Verity stood with Cole, accepting congratulations and good wishes, feeling like she might burst with happiness, when Annie Patterson shyly asked if this meant Verity was staying forever. Verity could answer with certainty, yes, forever and always. As the afternoon wore on and the crowd thinned, Cole and Verity found themselves on the church steps, watching the sun slant golden across the town. Mrs. Muller sat beside them, tired but triumphant. "Your mama would be so proud," she said softly, "to see you safe and loved and chosen. That's all she ever wanted." "I wish she could have been here," Verity said, leaning into Cole's solid presence. "She was," Cole said quietly, "maybe not in body, but in spirit, in every person who stood up today, in every voice that spoke for what's right. Your mama's courage lives on in you. Verity May Cole, and through you, it's changing this whole town." As they rode home in the fading light, Verity Cole, for that was who she was now, legal and binding and true, thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that terrible day when she'd held her dying mother's hand to this moment of joy and belonging. The Hutchins blood still ran in her veins, but it no longer defined her. She was Cole's daughter now, Mrs. Muller's unofficial granddaughter, friend to the Garrett children, member of a community that had finally found its conscience. The cabin came into view, warm and welcoming in the twilight. Home. Not because it was where she had to stay, but because it was where she chose to be, where she was chosen in return. "Thank you," she said to Cole as he helped her down from the buggy. "For what, little one?" "For seeing me," Verity said simply. "Not the Hutchins girl, not a burden, just me." Cole knelt down to her level, his gray eyes serious and warm. "Verity May Cole, you were never a burden. You were a gift I didn't know I was waiting for, and I thank God every day that I rode past that house when I did." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Verity stood between her father and Mrs. Muller, looking out over the land that had become her home. The journey had been hard, marked by loss and pain and fear. But it had led her here, to this moment, to these people, to this love that was chosen rather than owed. Her mother had whispered, "Be strong," with her dying breath. Now, Verity understood that strength wasn't just enduring cruelty. It was also accepting love, building family, and creating hope where none had existed before. It was Cole's quiet courage and Mrs. Muller's fierce advocacy, and a town slowly learning to speak up instead of looking away. The wild mustangs that sometimes ran past their land couldn't be more free than Verity felt in that moment. She was home. She was loved. She was chosen. And in the vast wilderness of the western frontier, under an endless canopy of stars, that was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope Verity and Cole's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from cowboys and cowgirls all around the world. Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this story in the comments below. Did it remind you of the power of chosen families? The importance of speaking up against injustice? Let's chat about it. Partners. Until our next adventure in the Old West, keep riding toward the sunset and choosing love over fear.